There we go. Okay, awesome. Welcome everyone. For those of you who don't know, well, you probably know I'm Emily Baker. But what I was going to say you may not know is that I actually have a background as a professional organizer. And that's a big part of why I love systems and structures, because organizing is all about creating systems and using structures to help those systems run more efficiently. I also have studied a couple of other great things on leadership and systems specifically. One of my favorites is a program I did that's from MIT's The Presencing Institute, and it's called Theory U. This is a big book, it's kind of intense, but I want to find, he has some videos that are golden, and I may be linking those in the description with this video and the replay if you're watching it, because he's got some like really cool stuff, and we're going to touch on a little bit here, but that may be a part two because he goes really into like the communication and stuff, and that's really fun. Anyways, that's a little bit of a background of why I love systems and structures and why we're having this conversation. But to clarify first, let's discuss like what is a system and what is a structure. System in particularly is a word that is thrown around a lot these days. You hear it used with things like talking about patriarchal systems, talking about systems that are, not favorable to people of color, and like how we need to change the system, right? But a lot of times that's kind of ambiguous, right? What is the system? So when we're trying to define it more specifically, that could be governments, that can be organizations, that can be policies and practices, official or just like kind of custom. This is the way we always think about things. This is the way we always do things. It's very hand in hand sometimes with culture, because some systems are intentional and some systems are organic. And this is where like the home organizing bit kind of comes into this. Is this, you can see this playing out in your home, right? I'm sure some of you have like very specific things that you have actually taken the time to set aside, like this is where we're going to keep the pots and pans, and this is where we're going to keep the silverware, and you probably have like a little divider to separate the forks, knives, and spoons, right? That is intentionally creating a system for the management of your kitchen cutlery or your cookware, right? There are probably other areas in your home, though, that organically have developed a system, and it's not really intentional, right? So this can be things like when you come home, you have your hands full of your briefcase and your coat and your keys and the mail that you grabbed while you're walking in. And so you just kind of toss the mail on the kitchen table and it creates a little pile of mail. And you do this regularly, and that kind of becomes your system, is that when you come home, you pick up the mail, you put it on the table. Later, when you get a chance, you'll open it, look at it, maybe do something with it, right? That's an organic system that has formed in your home. Now, the interesting thing is oftentimes organic systems that form innately, so without us intentionally doing anything, can be less useful, right? Because they're just kind of happening. Maybe they help us achieve our goals, maybe they don't. Whereas intentional systems, usually the reason they ever came about was somebody said, okay, this is a problem. I really want to just be able to grab a fork when I need it. I'm sick of having to dig through this drawer to find the piece of silverware I want. And so they created a structure in order to help support the system of organizing your cutlery, right? So intentional systems sometimes come about with businesses, right? I intentionally want to sell this product or provide this service. So I am going to create a system that's going to help me do this. Now, a lot of entrepreneurs or like solopreneurs, people who start their own businesses, they often kind of start organically, right? Where you're just kind of good at this thing and family and friends start asking you to do it or make it for them. And then you start selling it and word of mouth starts happening, right? And so it's just sort of starts to organically grow into this system. But there comes a point where it's like, okay, I need a way to process payments. I need a way to notify people of what I'm selling. I need a way to keep track of the orders or new customers or clients that I'm getting, right? And so you start to put these pieces together to help create a successful business, right? And people go to school to study specifically how to use structures. So that would be like a bookkeeping software is a type of structure, a like payment processor like PayPal is a structure, right? So they learn about these different structures. You can think of a structure as like a tool as well. And systems, right? That's what business school is all about, is how do you create a successful business with the purpose of making money, right? By selling a service or product. That's one example of a system. The church organization is another example of a system, and it is created. Oh, shoot. I was going to look up so that I had it. I don't know where it is. It's in one of my books that I wrote down, but I forgot to grab it before I came on. The church actually has like the three purposes of what the church organization has to do with. And I can't remember all of them. It's like to perfect the saints, redeem the dead. I want to say there's like one other. But like that's the purpose of the organization of the church as a structure. As a system, right? And some other like definitions that, or part of the, actually, I'm just going to pull it up. I know it's right here. Because that really frames the type of conversation we're having here. Because sometimes we get thinking about what church is, or maybe you've never asked that question, right? What is the purpose of going to church, right? If you've never pondered that question before, it's a really good one to think about. Okay, pulling it up. I think there's actually 4. Somebody added a 4th one recently, I feel like. I want to pull it from the church's website. I'm sorry I didn't have this pulled up beforehand. If any of you know, feel free to share or put it in the chat. Okay, it's not coming up as quick as I thought it would. Okay, yep, it's not coming up. That's okay. But I think it's really interesting that the way it describes it, particularly the perfecting the saints and redeeming the dead, that those are 2 of the purposes, right? Sometimes like teaching the gospel could be a part of perfecting the saints, right? Part of perfecting the saints could also be creating space to learn from one another, to uplift one another, right? I think it's just so interesting that that was the phrasing that was chosen, perfecting the saints, right? It didn't say like the purpose is to help people understand the scriptures or to make sure you do or don't do certain things, right? The fact that there's this focus on our ultimate growth and development to become like our heavenly parents who are perfect, right? That's what that means to me, the perfecting of saints, I think is really, really beautiful. And part of the reason I bring this up is I will go to somebody's home to organize it for them. And they before I get there, I send them like this email of like what to expect, how to prepare. And one of the things in there is I tell them not to clean up because there's a tendency to be like, oh, I don't want somebody to see my mess, especially this professional organizer who probably has like this beautiful home that's clean and perfect all the time, which for the record, my home is not. That's a myth about professional organizers. That's a whole nother conversation. Yeah, there can be like this pressure and they want to like have it all nice and clean and be like, look, I'm not a mess. I still want your help, but like, don't think I'm some like person on hoarders or something, right? There's this concern there. And I tell them, no, keep it in its natural state, because this is where the overlap between organic systems that develop and intentional systems meets. And it's a really important one to understand. I'm going on a little bit more of a tangent than I'm meant to, but we are going to circle back around to the church. So hang with me. So I tell them, keep it in its natural wild state. I want to see that pile of mail on the table. I want to see where your kids scatter their clothes and where they tend to play with their toys and, where the messes happen in the kitchen, right? The reason being that gives me a roadmap for how you're flowing and moving through the space, which allows me to create a system that is going to naturally support you better. Because if I just come in, and I love using this one client as my example, she struggled with mail so bad. Like when I met her, she had, I don't even know, like all of her counter just like covered in mail. It was months worth of mail, right? And she just really struggled with it. She was always paying things late, behind on bills, having these extra fees and stuff. Like just, it was difficult for her. And it's very easy for me to come in and say to her and be like, oh my gosh, you are so irresponsible. You call yourself an adult. Like, how are you functioning? Is this the way you're living your life? Like, don't you know about like online automatic payment stuff? Why do you even have all this paper? Like, no. Let me show you what you should be doing. Right. And I could come in and tell her, when you get the mail, you need to bring it in and you put it in this spot. And then, anything that's important, you open right now, you pay it right then, you throw away the junk mail as you're like, don't even let it touch the counter. It goes from your hand into the garbage can, right? All these different things I could be telling her. This is the way you manage mail. And if you do this, then you're not going to have this big pile of mess. You're not going to have creditors coming after you. You're not going to be paying all these late fees and missing your bills and stuff. And your stress level is going to go down. You're going to be so much happier, right? But what if she's not ready for that? What if that is not supportive to the rest of her life and what she has going on, right? In some cases, mail may be a struggle because this person's husband is sick and out of work, and she's trying to take care of her kids and take care of her husband, and she's stressed and emotionally worried about him and like all these things, right? If I come in and I tell her all of those things about how she's doing it wrong and how dare you be doing this, and like, I can't believe you let it go this long, like, don't you understand how important this is, right? That's not going to be very helpful to her, right? She's probably going to walk away feeling bad about herself and about her situation. And she probably was already feeling bad, right? That is not implementing a system that is going to be supportive to her. So what I do instead is when I enter a space, I want to see it in its natural space. And that tells me something too, because a system, organic, or intentional, doesn't matter, is always a reflection of the parts that make up it, right? So you want a healthy business that's thriving, that's really successful. That means it's got healthy people who are creating the systems that are running that business, right? You show me a business that is struggling, that is having a hard time with its customer support, with keeping up on schedules, whatever, right? That's unhealthy, that's not performing well. I will tell you, there are problems with the people inside that. It could be relationships that are going on. Ah, thank you, Becky, you found it. Perfect the saints, redeem the dead, proclaim the gospel. There we go. I knew there was one with the gospel. And care for the poor and needy. Perfect. We'll circle back to that. But so yeah, a business is only, or a system is only as healthy and helpful as the people that make it up, right? So if I see a lot of chaos in a space, it tells me the mental load, mental and emotional, the internal stuff that's going on with that person is a lot, and it's being expressed and reflected in the environment around them, right? So that kind of gives me a gauge of where they are and how I can best help them. So I walk in, I say, how, tell me about what's going on. I start asking lots of questions and I listen, right? So this girl, we go through these different things and I'm like, no, like she's, a pretty on top of it person. She's naturally tends to be organized. Like this shouldn't be a problem for her. The more we dove into it, what we got to was ultimately she had money beliefs that she struggled with. Anything that had to do with money stressed her out. She always had this thought of, I don't have enough money. I'm going to be running out of money. Lots of these just really harsh, negative views about money that really stressed her. So anytime she saw a piece of mail, it automatically became the possibility for a bill. And she wasn't sure how to manage the emotions around that. It was really difficult for her. And the best part was she had another organizer who gave her this little organizing system for her to follow. And when you come home and you can put your coupons here and you can put your bills here and you can put your to file stuff here, right? It didn't work, right? And so what I said to her is I was like, your goal right now is not that, right? That's not what's going to support you. The biggest thing that's going on here is this builds up too much and you have no clue what is a new bill, what is an old bill, like what do you need to look at first? How long has it been sitting in the pile, right? That's our first thing we need to address. So instead of having a file system that was broken down by category, we broke it down by what was going, or weeks, right? Of a month. A month typically has 4 to 5 weeks. So we had 4 to 5 slots. And every time she got the mail, she would put it in that week's slot. And then she knew when she needed to sit down and pay bills, the week 1 mail has been sitting here for at least a week, maybe 2, because I'm starting to put mail in the week 3 slot. I really need to go and open those and start addressing them, right? So that's creating a system that's working with where she is and what's going on, right? And so this is what's really beautiful about a lot of stuff that's happening right now is we are taking, as a society, right, looking at these systems we have, again, whether that's government systems, where that's just interactive policy systems or the unspoken ways we interact with people, right? And saying, you know what? Dumping all the mail on the table, it's not really working, right? We're ending up with this big cost and it's hurting people. Let's do something about it, right? And we're looking at other places and we're going, you know what? This system that we've created of putting our coupons, bills, and whatever here, it's good. It's got some basic stuff, but it's not the best for what we need right now. And starting to address it and starting to bring up these different pieces of what's going on, right? So this brings us back to any system, and the church specifically, which is you have to know what it is you want and what we're trying to get out of it in order to be able to create a system that's going to give you the results you want. If you just inorganically let something develop, it's going to develop with whatever the desire is at that time, right? Oftentimes those are least resistance things that don't take as much energy, effort, thought, work, right? Very focused on me and my experience right now in the here and now. They're not as open, they're not as inclusive, tend to be, right? So anyways, coming back to the church, when we look at the systems we have within the church, it gets really interesting because a lot of people sit there and go, okay, we have the church and we have church culture, and those are the two pieces. Actually, not the case. If we look at it a lot more, there's a lot more systems that are going on here. I want to show you a little diagram actually. Actually, I have this pulled up. I'm going to screen share it with you guys because I think that'll be easier. I was going to draw it live while we were talking, but I think it'll be easier if I just show it to you. If you can't tell, sometimes I like to really prepare things and get them down to the nail. This is one where I kind of felt guided to just keep it a little bit more open and see what came up as we were talking and open it up to different perspectives. So I have my outlines, but I'm also just kind of letting things be guided as we go. Okay, so here we go. Let's pull this up. Share screen. Okay, if you can see, there are actually 6 different pillars that make up the church, right? So, and we may or may not dive into this one, the difference between the gospel and doctrine. There's the ecclesiastical organization. So that is like when we go to church on Sundays, this is your bishop, your stake presidency, your ward leaders, all that. That's the ecclesiastical organization and how it's run, ward councils, stake meetings, stake conference, tithing, all of that comes in here. Then there's the corporation of the church, right? So that is downtown Salt Lake City in the church office building. There's lots of different departments there. You have the temple department, you have the financing department, you have the PR department, right? Lots of stuff that's going on there. Then we have church culture and we have the people, right? The people is like such an important part of the church that sometimes we forget about it, right? But each one of these contributes to the system of the whole. And it's really important at times that we look at the different pieces of this because there are actually different intentions, different purposes, different smaller systems and structures set up within each of these, where the guidance comes from, right? So, for example, in the ecclesiastical organization, there are some very specific rules on the handling of tithing money, right? Who can receive it? Who do you give it to? Who can enter it in? Different things like that. And a lot of those rules are governed by priesthood authority structure, which is a system that is part of how the ecclesiastical organization is run. If, however, you look at the corporation side of things, women are able to work in the finance department. They are working with the money, right? Like you can be interviewed and be hired for a job considered just as equally to a woman or a man as a woman, right? It's going to be looking at the qualifications, the training, the ability you have to do the job, right? Priesthood authority is not how the corporation system is run. And it's kind of fun. My dad works for the church, so I've actually had opportunities to see a lot of how this happens. And so it's very interesting because sometimes we look at how the ecclesiastical organization is run and we assume that that's the position that all of the quorum of the 12 apostles and the prophet and first presidency must hold those same perspectives, right? Like that they're the ones who think, women can't do these things or whatever, because they haven't changed it in the ecclesiastical organization. Yet when you look at the corporation system, they are, still the head of the finance departments. That's where, those reports that we hear at General Conference, they are given regularly throughout the year to the first presidency. Decisions are made with them, right? We hear little bits and stories sometimes through conference about things that happen in the corporation side of things, such as like mission calls and stuff. So to me, there's a disparity here, right? And some would say, well, that's because the corporation is like a legal part of the world. They can't discriminate based on gender, right? That's against the law. So they're being guided by the world here, whereas that's not the case in the ecclesiastical one. And to which I say, it's really, again, important to understand what is the purpose and the background behind each of these, right? So when we look at the ecclesiastical organization, which is what we're going to focus on a little bit tonight, I will probably be doing some more posts on these 6 pillars and how they interact with each other. We probably won't be able to get into the gospel and the doctrine. Maybe in the show notes, I'll link one of my favorite conference talk, or it was actually a BYU devotional that Elder Bednar gave on this, but it's really good. Just because I don't want to keep you here for hours. But the ecclesiastical organization is really the one to start looking at, because this is well, actually, let me back up. Do I have a picture here? Yes. Okay. So the whole purpose of, I'm going to make this big again. The corporation, ignore the arrows for a second, because this is actually trying to display a different concept than what I'm about to teach you. But it kind of showcases what I'm trying to tell you here. The whole purpose of the corporation is ultimately to support the ecclesiastical organization. And the ecclesiastical organization's purpose is to help implement those purposes of the church, right? And what those purposes are is determined by, sorry, I was going to pull it up in the chat, is determined by the doctrine, right, of the church. And the way we implement all of these things is through the people, whether those are people in the corporation, people in the ecclesiastical organization, or just the general membership of the church, right? So again, ignore the arrows, sorry. But that's really neat to look at, right? So it's important to understand this kind of flow. And what I'm trying to show here is the way that it's supported is inversely related to how we affect change, right? So the gospel of Jesus Christ is the teachings that he taught. They were all about changing the hearts of people, focused on who the people were, who they were becoming. It was focused on the type of people they were. From that, and as I've studied this more, I've kind of changed my perspective from when I originally wrote this. So doctrine, I might actually put down here and put this more as policy or how we enact things. But the state of the people influences things more like, do we have a structure that is 3-hour block church or 2-hour block church? The purpose of those structures is to support the system of the ecclesiastical church, which is trying to help us fulfill the purpose of perfecting the saints and proclaiming the gospel, right? So those things can be adjusted. We use different structures in the same system in order to be more efficient, right? One example of this in like the organizing world is you may create a system in your closet for how to organize your children's clothes, right? And when they're small, the clothes don't take up very much space. So you may use like small little bins. But as the kids grow, the clothes get bigger. And so now you need more space. You may keep the same system of like, I have one basket for shirts and one basket for pants and one basket for pajamas. But you just get bigger containers in order to house those things, right? So the structure is changing, but the overall system can stay the same. Now, sometimes the system itself is in need of a change. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit more later with like the natural life cycle of a system and how that evolves. But for now, yeah, the focus, the point that this was trying to make in this picture was to say any change you want to affect in, again, pretend this says like policy or things that are not specifically doctrinally outlined. They're things we tend to think of more, not quite church culture, right? But not quite doctrine, that kind of in between space. That's what goes here. So our biggest influence is the people. Supporting the ecclesiastical organization, these policies then determine how the ecclesiastical organization is run and the corporation is run, right? And as things shift there, they bounce between each other. That picture was not important, and I'm sorry I wasted some time on it. Hopefully, I guess there was something important that needed to come out of that. But the thing I wanted to focus on was, I get really excited about this. I have some ADD tendencies, so when I get excited about something, I sometimes go on a bit of a tangent. So I'm going to bring it back in. Okay. The focus of this, and the other difficult thing here was I wanted to teach a lot more involved in systems and structures, generally speaking, but really felt like I needed to focus more on the ecclesiastical part of the church. And so that's where we're going to go to now. And understanding the ecclesiastical side of the church and how that specific system is run, we need to go back and look at the history of priesthood authority. Now, if you haven't watched Sharing Heavenly Mother Part 2, I highly recommend it because it's going to go into a lot more of the detail of why I believe this is the case. But for now, I'm just going to kind of lay this out for you. If you haven't studied before, there are actually two different types of priesthood structures. The hierarchical priesthood and the familial priesthood. It was sometimes called patriarchal priesthood, but President Benson came out and said it's much better to refer to it as the familial priesthood. And because we use patriarchy so much in a different term, I like to refer to it as familial priesthood. So the familial priesthood actually existed at the time of Adam and Eve, and throughout a lot of the Old Testament. You see it with Abraham, and it was more of a family structure priesthood. We see that kind of more similar in the temple and with like women's roles of having the priesthood in the temple, right? That's kind of a reflection of the familial priesthood, where husbands and wives together were involved in the saving ordinances, right? Specifically of their family, right? What happened over time, though, was the family structure and kind of culture of the time changed, so it didn't support that as much, as well as I believe mankind, just generally speaking, chose to start practicing more of a patriarchal society. Now, patriarchy is like a buzzword these days, right? And it's one of those things that like some people get a little like, myself included, particularly in the past, of like, I don't know, if you're talking about patriarchy, I don't know. But if you understand what patriarchy is saying, especially looking at it through a systems perspective, patriarchy is saying that the way the system is set up is that the patriarch, or in this reference referring to males by that term, are the ones who are in the leadership positions or the main positions, right? And patriarchy is not a term that is used exclusively to the church, right? There are a lot of just the world in general for a long time. You know, men were the main income earners, they were the leaders in businesses, right? There's this, in the world, we see this kind of like catching up momentum of women joining men, that, you know, a woman can do any job a man can. She's not limited to being a nurse or a teacher or secretary, right? And so that's where it's important to understand it's not like saying like men are bad. That's what often comes across, is like, oh my gosh, men are terrible. No, it's saying this system that is described by male leadership or male superiority is not healthy for men or women, right? It's akin to saying having a single cup that I keep all of my silverware in is not the best system that I could be using, right? And that cup system is not a reflection on the silverware, right? It's just the system that is being currently used. And the idea is we can choose at any time to try and implement new systems and to discover what those could look like. So going back to our story, Old Testament, we've got familiar priesthood, husband and wife together. Humanity decides, you know what? We want to put the husband or men above women, and just women, you just cook and clean and take care of kids, right? Now, I think that mankind made that choice first, and God said, okay, if this is how you have your agency, you're allowed to choose what you want. If this is what you're choosing, the familial priesthood is no longer a system that aligns and supports with the choices you have made. So I'm going to take the familial priesthood away, and instead I'm going to give you a new system, which is the hierarchical priesthood, which is the priesthood system we are familiar with today, where men can trace their lineage of where they received the priesthood. Hierarchy refers to like a ladder, one above the other. And so mankind chose to put one above the other, and God said, okay, if that's how you're going to do it, here's a priesthood system that matches that, right? So as time goes on, though, this hierarchical system also eventually gets lost, right? And the system that Christ created of having 12 apostles gets lost, right? Both of those things are lost during the apostasy, the Dark Ages, right? When we talk about the fullness of the gospel being restored through Joseph Smith, I believe that's in reference to the system of the hierarchical priesthood being restored and the system that Christ created for his church of the 12 apostles being restored, right? And that's how we can say that the gospel was fully restored by Joseph Smith, and yet there's still room for us to move forward, right? And again, if you want to go more in depth of like the scriptural support for different things like this and just kind of understanding it on a deeper level, go watch Sharing Heavenly Mother Part 2. It also talks about like where we could be going in the future and could we be returning back to that familial priesthood structure. There's a I personally think that is something that would happen. Does that happen on Earth? Does that happen in Zion? Does it happen in the millennium? Does it happen in the next life? I don't know. Those are questions for God. But to me, that seems to be the pattern that is established, and where I would say, okay, kids, you chose this journey. We've been taking you on. You got really far out of whack at one point. Joseph Smith was like, okay, we're ready. We can start bringing some of this back. You can start being responsible for this again. And to me, the whole goal of a Zion people is to support that return. And so when we start looking at equality of men and women and how do we find this balance again of like, okay, if men and women are equal, does that mean like when the hierarchical priesthood is no longer the main one and maybe we move back to the familial priesthood, like do we have a male and a female prophet? Do we have, because we have a male and a female God in Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother, right? Following that pattern. That pattern is called a diarchy. And I want to show you how this looks when it's like in diagram form, because I think it just makes it a little bit more sense. So I'm going to share my screen again so you can see this. Okay. So hierarchical, there's like a person at the top. This could be a prophet. This could be a CEO. This could be a president. This could be a king, right? And then you have people under them and people under them, right? This is a structure we're very familiar with. Almost all of our systems are hierarchical in one form or another. And there's a reason for this. It can be very efficient, right? It's very clear who's in charge, who makes decisions, right? It's very easy to pass information down very quickly to a large number of people. It's very easy to efficiently get a lot of things done on a big scale because this person doesn't have to be involved with every little person further down, right? So there's a lot of benefits and reasons why we've used hierarchical structures. But the next proposed idea is like, okay, if we're going to make men and women to be more equal in our societies, would it start to look like a diarchical structure where we have a man and a woman at the top, a king and a queen, and then other people underneath? Some people think that is the case. I actually believe it's going to lead us more towards a heterarchical structure, which is essentially taking that hierarchy ladder. Sorry, I'm trying to find a spot where the dots from my window are on my face. Taking that ladder and flipping it on the side and saying every person is equal, right? To me, that's the definition of a Zion society. That's the definition of the law of consecration, right? This equality in all things, including leadership. And it's like, okay, great, Emily, like that sounds nice in idea, but how is that practical? How do you still have like somebody still has to be making the decisions and like getting things done, right? And so how do you do that in a hierarchical structure? Well, the coolest thing is in a hierarchical structure, you can still have a type of hierarchical one. But this is where the idea of preside gets really, really fun. This is from another presentation that I've done. So I'm just like using some of the slides. Probably would have been better if I made a brand new presentation for this, but live and learn. So one of the examples of this is actually how we could start making the shift right now. And in fact, how it's already started in some of the policies and even conference addresses that we've had in recent years. And one of those was looking at the bishop to be focused more on the youth and to allow the elders quorum president and the relief society president to be more the ones who are running the society. I was going to use this image, but I realized it's kind of jumping ahead, so I'm going to go back, sorry, to this one. Because what I was trying to say is the whole point in a hierarchical society is anyone can take a leadership position. Everyone has equal ability, equal authority, right? And so it's just whoever desires to or wants to is able to step up and fulfill that, right? And so it becomes really beautiful in that regard because there isn't this inherent, like, you have to have certain, like, you have to be a man, or you have to have the priesthood, or you have to have a degree, or you have to whatever in order to be able to lead this, right? It's simply because the societal structure, right? And this is where it's really key. Hierarchical structures do not work with people who are not living in what we would call a Zion society, right? We've tried. This is like, you get examples of this coming up with things like communism, socialism, right? Anything along those lines. It's like hinting at that desire we have to move forward here. But the key piece is you have to have a people who genuinely believe that I am focused on building my own relationship with God, and you are focused on building your own and trusting in that, right? And there's this mutual trust there that we are acting out of what we feel is best for. Okay, I'm sorry. Sometimes when I go, when I'm doing things like this, I try to be in tune with what I'm saying. And the reason I'm like pausing, because as I'm going here, I can feel what I'm saying is not correct and not the right answer to what I'm trying to say. And so my mind is like receiving that input of like, nope, this is not right. And also simultaneously like continuing to talk. So that's what was going on there. But anyways, you have to have, and like, this is where I'm struggling, is this is a whole nother like conversation we could go into about how do you become a balanced person? How do you live out of a state of wholeness? If you did watch the Sharing Heavenly Mother Part 2 panel discussion, I talked about one perspective, like masculine and feminine energy and the wounded of each versus the wholeness one, right? So there's a lot of layers here of like what type of people you have to have in order for a system like this to really function well, right? But it's essentially saying like anyone, the ultimate tag team, right? Think of the perfect parenting partnership where they are equal, both husband and wife. They take turns doing, changing the diapers, putting the kids to bed, bathing them, feeding them, right? There is no like, oh, mom always changes the diapers, right? Just because she's the mom. That's not there. That's a different system that usually has developed innately, organically, right? And we are a lot more in society saying, hey, let's shift this organic system that's developed that says all the childcare work is the responsibility of mom, and say we want to intentionally establish a system where it's the role of both parents, right? And so, okay, a kid has a poopy diaper, who is going to change it? Well, who's more available? You know, maybe dad's cooking dinner and so mom changes it. Maybe mom is working and so dad changes it, right? There is this thing of like just whoever is available can step up and fulfill that role, right? So it's a really good way to kind of think about what a hierarchical structure can look like. But at the same time, within a hierarchical structure, you can create hierarchical system, you can create other structures that support that, right? So it might be more convenient to say, hey, mom works evenings, and so dad, you're always in charge of bedtime, right? Not because, oh, dad is inherently better at bedtime. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't, but that's irrelevant in this case to the decision. That's how we tend to think about hierarchy, is that it's an earned thing. Whole separate conversation. I'll save that tangent. But you can still make these decisions, but they're coming from this place of equal power, equal opportunity, not a place of like, well, you're not on the right rung in the ladder to be able to do that, so you don't get to. If that makes sense. So moving forward, part of the changes that were made with the structure saying, Bishop, we need you to focus more on the youth, and we want you delegating more stuff to the Elders Quorum and the Relief Society president. This actually starts to create a structure that begins to allow for this hierarchical structure to exist within a hierarchy, right? Which is really, really cool, especially when we look at a couple definitions of preside. So I'm going to stop my screen share for a second so I can pull these up. If some of you know Milkmaid's Honey, Jessica Venderson, I think Wegerson, I can never remember her last name. I think that's her last name. But she did a great post talking about this idea of preside. And because we're so familiar with hierarchical structures, and because they have so often been presented in ways where it is earned, for example, one of the most common hierarchical structures is business, right? You earn the promotion because you were the best at the job, or because you had the most connections, or right? There's something that was inherent about who you were and your worth that created this momentum, and where we get the phrase climbing the ladder, right? And because there have been a lot of examples of what I would call people in a hierarchical structure operating out of woundedness, which I'll be doing another class talking specifically about masculine and feminine energies and woundedness and healing. So those will be coming up. We'll dive into that more then. But in essence, people who are using their power to say, I'm better than you. You have to do what I say. I don't care how you feel, right? My way or the highway, right? These types of ideas have become attached to a hierarchical structure and given us this really kind of negative taste of authority in a lot of ways. And that comes not from the fact that the system is a hierarchy, but that comes from the fact of the person who is operating within the system. And this is a really important distinction to make. It's one that I'll use organizing again as an example to kind of help illustrate. People will say to me, I'm really struggling with like my paper management in my office. And I'll be like, I just can't wait for you to come and create this perfect system. And then I'll always have a clean office and it'll be great, right? And I have to say to them, the system does not magically clean your office, right? The system magnifies your abilities and helps make them more efficient in how they operate. But if you don't have those general abilities to begin with, you're still going to struggle, right? And so some of those abilities when it comes to paper management in an office, maybe things like time management, maybe things like setting boundaries. A lot of things go into this. You need to ask Dad right now.
He's going bathroom.
Okay.
Pause it.
Sorry, my son came in here for a second, needing some help. But it's really easy to like blame the system. And what I see happening with a lot of people is they will end up system hopping. So they'll find like one system and it like, oh yeah, it works for a little while and then it falls apart because they don't have the innate ability to keep it up yet. And that's not to say they can't develop it, can't learn it. It just means they haven't yet, right? And so, but when it falls apart, they think, oh, I guess this wasn't the right system. And so they go to Pinterest, they go to Instagram, right? And they look for, how to organize kids' toys. And they're like, oh, that's a good idea. I should try that this time. And they keep kind of doing that, hoping that they can just find this magic system that is going to fix everything, right? And it's very easy when you are operating within a system to say, this is wrong with the system, this is wrong with the system, this is wrong with the system, and we need to fix those things in order to experience the desired outcome, right? And what I always teach is you don't fix the system first. You fix the people first. Because that is where the initial struggle is happening, right? So this is what happened a lot with hierarchical systems in general. You had people who abused them, people who used them as a way to hurt and put down and take advantage of other people. And so it's very easy to now associate the system with those outcomes. Now, if we look at preside and the actual meaning of it, one of the definitions is the right to act in a specified way delegated from one person or organization to another. And I love the Latin actual definition. Hang on, I'm going to close the door. Okay, we're back. The Latin definition of the word preside, which was shared in Milkmaid's Honey's post, which is, so it comes from the Latin word pre, meaning before or in front of, and sedere, meaning to sit. So in Latin, preside literally transforms as to sit in front of, right? And the reason I love that definition is because paired with this idea of the right to act in a specified way. Neither of those is indicating power above another or worth above another, which is how we have wrongly used hierarchy in the past, right? And so, for example, I sometimes do big organizing jobs. So it's like a team of professional organizers. We go to these big, beautiful houses. Somebody is moving in, and we unpack their whole house and organize it for them. And usually the kitchen is one of the biggest projects, and a single organizer will be put in charge of the kitchen, right? So they are given the right to act in a specified way. There's usually given a couple other organizers to work with them. They are largely the ones responsible for having the final say of like, okay, we're going to put the silverware in this drawer, and we're going to put the paper plates and napkins and paper cups in this cupboard, right? They're going over the layout. But they operate with the other organizers as the best leaders do. They do not operate in vacuum. They take in the ideas of others, they incorporate them together. It is not a singular power position coming down. We're going to touch on again in a sec. But the other key piece is the fact that that organizer is in charge of the kitchen is not saying that any of the other organizers is less qualified to be there. Oftentimes, if you work with the same team over multiple jobs, you know, at this house, it might be this organizer in charge of the kitchen, and at this house, it might be that organizer. And maybe we know like this organizer hates kitchens, so she's never in the kitchen. She wants to be doing other stuff, right? Or this organizer loves them, so we always put her in the kitchen when she's doing stuff, right? That's not because of, again, a position of power or ability or worth. It is simply, we need an efficient way to have somebody making these decisions, and that's how we're going to be doing it. A lot of organizers okay, I'm not going to go there quite yet. So when we parallel this back to like a husband and wife, again, this should be equal discussion, equal things going in. Preside is not to say you are going to be the one who gets to just say my way or the highway because I'm presiding. No, that role is specifically to create more efficiency in how we're getting things done, right? So if we need somebody who is going to be communicating to other people, or who's going to be, you know, for example, going back to the organizer thing, the person who's in charge of the kitchen, they are responsible for checking in on the other organizers to like see how it's going. Hey, have you done this job? Do you need any other supplies? How much longer do you think you're going to need, right? Because we're paid by the hour, and so those things matter, right? We want to make sure they have all the right supplies. And so that's just like a general thing to be keeping track of. Similarly, my husband and I have decided, you know, like when it comes to money or paying bills, we're both equally have the authority to do that within the family, right? But we have decided, you know, he's going to be in charge of some and I'm going to be in charge of other. And there are times where, as you've seen, I tend to be a lot more all over in the things that I'm doing. So he will tend to be the one who checks in and says, hey, have we made sure this has been paid? This has been paid. This has been paid. You go, yep, that has. There are other areas in our marriage and in our life where I'm more aware of things, and I have more of that specified way that I'm acting that's been determined by the two of us coming together in agreement, and I'm checking in on him, right? So it goes both ways. And when we compare this idea with that of where the idea of hierarchical priesthood came from and familial priesthood, to me, it creates this sense of like where that word came from, right? It came from this hierarchical structure that we had, and that naturally transferred over into families, right? And if we are going to continue on the upswing and progressing back towards being able to live potentially this higher familial priesthood structure again, that may shift and adjust in the language that we use, right? But again, coming back to the importance of systems and how you change them, you don't change a system by just saying like, okay, we need a new system. You can do that, and sometimes it's effective, right? This file cabinet system is not working for us anymore. We're going to do it digital, right? We're just going to get rid of the filing cabinet system, do a whole new system, right? But that only is going to work if the person in charge of doing the filing knows how to do digital things. Do they know how to use a scanner? Do they know how to create folders and work with a cloud and, however else you're going to be accessing it, right? And so sometimes it can be very limiting and sit here and go, I just wish I had a bigger box, right? Or I just wish I had a different system. When the system doesn't have to change from the outside in. And I believe it's actually more effective when it starts from the inside out. So, going back to all of this, what do we do in the meantime when this hierarchical structure is still here of the priesthood established as the hierarchical priesthood? How do we as women find this equalness within it? So I'm going to pull back up the example I was showing of the bishop to display that. So one of the key pieces is to understand what I like to think of this way is preside is priesthood authority, or coming back to the Latin definition, to sit in front of. There's somebody here because we're still working within some sort of hierarchical structure of we need some sort of order in place, right? Because otherwise, well, is sister so-and-so gathering the tithing today, or is brother so-and-so? And is it getting all counted, and who's sending it to the bank? And like, right? To have some sort of order and structure that this person is in charge of this and this person is in charge of that. That's the value of hierarchy in general, right? So stewardship, though, becomes a really powerful word here. And along with it, I say priesthood power. Every one of us, male or female, has access to priesthood power. Okay? We have heard this reiterated over and over in multiple general conference talks, talking about women. You need to understand the priesthood power that you have access to, how to utilize it, how to bring it into your life, right? And understanding, again, the idea of stewardship. So going back to the relationship with my husband and like finances, I have stewardship over bills. He has stewardship over monthly budget, right? Now we still check in with each other. We still create the budget together, but he's going to be the one who is presiding over the budget and checking as we're spending, making sure we're matching what our goals were and what we're going along with. And hey, we need to have this conversation again, right? And I have the stewardship over making sure the bills get paid and I have access to the money and I'm still buying things and I'm still paying for things, right? And it's that joint partnership together that can really occur. Now, maybe one day, God will decide that priesthood authority is going to be available to women as well. Maybe they won't. I don't know. I'm not God. That's not a question I'm here to answer. My question here to answer is more of looking at how do we navigate our stewardships? How do we access our priesthood power? And do so in conjunction with those who have priesthood authority and are called to preside? How do we do this in a more balanced way that is helping us move towards a Zion people and a heterarchical society? So this is a little diagram I have here. The bishop sits in front of or presides and is the steward of the word. So he has both priesthood authority, which is a certain way to act, which is, outlined as, he's the one who does temple recommend interviews and, the whole section in Doctrine and Covenants of being a judge in Israel, which, again, a whole nother thing about, are you operating out of wholeness or woundedness? Because even that can sometimes by some people be abused, right? And so we again view these things as negative systems or negative traits, when in actuality, it's the healthiness of the individual. And maybe a system is making it easier for a person to be unhealthy, and we can adjust our systems and structures in ways to promote greater healthiness. For example, how things have shifted, that now with interviews of youth, parents can always be there, right? So that is an example of a system being shifted to help support the people who make up the system being healthier, right? So anyways, back to this. Bishop has the priesthood authority and priesthood power over the ward, right? They are the main one who can receive revelation for the whole of the ward, right? That's what the stewardship piece of it, that priesthood power bit. Okay, so then we have the Elders Quorum president and the Relief Society president, and I love this parallel power here, right? So this is not like Elders Quorum is above Relief Society president. It's this idea again, getting back to that parallel role within the ward. The Elders Quorum president is given stewardship over the Elders Quorum and the men in the ward. The Relief Society president is given stewardship over the Relief Society and the women in the ward, right? But then you also have here a ward council. And so you see we have like layers of this higher hierarchical structure, right? Of balance between Elders Quorum and Relief Society president, the ward council. So that's got the Relief Society president, the Elders Quorum, the young men, the young women, the primary, the nursery, right? All the different branches of the ward, they're all equal. They all contribute. They should all have the same voice. They should all be viewed as having parallel power over their specific stewardships, right? And then we have the next level, which is ministering, which comes from person to person, the members in that ward having parallel power to help one another and to have stewardship over those you are called to minister to, right? So we get this hierarchical structure, but we also get this hierarchical structure that's going on. And this is entirely possible right now within the current policies and structures of the church. And in fact, the fact that they were telling bishops, hey, you need to start shifting some of this, speaks to me that this is the direction they were leading us when they made these changes, right? It sounded kind of out of the blue and sort of random at first, like, okay, sure, we can put an emphasis on this. I'm not sure why, but I think this is a main piece of it, right? And I've heard really neat stories of things like bishops who tell the Elders Quorum president and the Relief Society that they can both use their office for meeting with people as they're helping them, as they're planning things, right? They want to encourage that idea of this parallel power between them and understanding like, you guys need to be a team. You guys need to be, the husband and wife of the ward, right? And I'm just kind of here to make sure that happens, right? Rather than the bishop being the sole father of the word. If that makes sense. I thought that was really beautiful, that idea of like, you both get access to this office, you both should be meeting with people regularly and checking in and, you know, having counsel sessions with people who are going through hard times, right? That, because that was one of the things, was that to make it a little more personal, and it didn't always have to be ward members meeting with the bishop, but that you could go and meet with your Relief Society president if you were having a struggle or had some questions on things. And if there was something that was outside of her jurisdiction, that she could then take it to the bishop and he could help fulfill that, right? But that she became more involved in the personal level. And I think a piece of that too, like having the elders quorum president be more than the ward's moving service, right? That is seen as, like, it makes me think of in cultures, or the stereotype we have of like the man child, right? And it's like, okay, elders quorum, like it's time to rise to this level of leadership within a ward and direction for the ward, and not just, you know, over a few things, right? So this, I think, is a really fun idea to play with, this idea of hierarchy and heterarchy. So then we're getting kind of late, so I do want to wrap it up here and leave a couple of time for questions. The last bit I wanted to touch on real quick, though, is the life cycle of a system. So a system can shift and adjust depending on life changes, priority changes, ability changes, desire changes, right? So there is an important step that is always an adjustment, right? In even the best systems as an organizer, there's never the expectation that I'm going to come in, create a system for you based off of how I've gotten to know you and what's going on in your life and what your goals are, and that it's always going to work. Because again, you may have life changes, priority changes, ability changes, desire changes, and those things are going to adjust the system. Now, the goal is to create more and more efficient systems so that those changes are just small little tweaks and they're easy to make. But in the beginning, they're sometimes really big, right? And that's okay. Recognizing that's a part of the process and the evolution is really, really important. So when we go back to those main goals of the church, perfecting the saints, redeeming the dead, proclaiming the gospel, caring for the poor and needy, those things have certain systems and structures that are in place and have been divinely guided by our heavenly parents. That doesn't mean that this is the only way to enact those things, right? There may always be certain structures we want there, right? Like, for example, there may be different ways to organize the silverware drawer, but we know we always want the forks together, the spoons together, and the knives together, right? We may choose that the sharp knives are in the drawer. We may choose that they're on a block. We may choose, you know, that we only have like one, and so it can just go with the butter knives, right? Some pieces are more adjustable than others. And that's where having that divine guidance is helpful to know. Is this a fork, spoon, knife situation where we want to make sure those are separated? Or is this a situation where we can be a little bit more flexible and we can have sharp knives in a cutting block and we can have sharp knives in a drawer, right? But getting caught up in the idea that a system that is correct never shifts really misses out, to me, on part of the whole point of our mortal experience, which is we are here to grow and develop and become perfected, become more like our heavenly parents. And the more we grow and develop, the more our systems that support us can become more efficient in what they are doing, right? Think about some of the changes that have occurred with the way we do family history work because of technology advances, right? Redeeming the dead for the pioneers looks very different than redeeming the dead for us. There are still certain things that are in place, those structures, we're still using them, right? I may keep my same bins from one system that I created and my same file organizer, whatever, but I'm going to adjust a little bit how I use it. That's this natural progression that gets to happen. And so becoming more comfortable with allowing some of that to take place and allowing this flow to happen allows it to happen faster, because then we're not sitting there going, no, this is the only way to organize mail and it's the right way and it's the best way. But we might miss out on having your bills paid online and doing it all digitally. And I don't even need all this paper taking up my desk, right? But if we get caught up in this is the way we've always done mail, we might miss out on that. So I have a process that I teach. It's called the START method. You sort, thin, assign a home, return, and tune. It's how I organize different spaces. And it applies to any sort of system. The first step is sort, right? You got to take a collection and inventory of what you got, what's in the junk drawer, pull it all out, start looking at it, start going, yes, this is good. I want to keep it. No, this is broken. It is old. I want to get rid of it, right? That's a lot of the work we're doing right now is a sorting process that's going on. And that parallels with the thinning, right? Thinning is starting to remove pieces that don't support the end goal we want, right? And so maybe it's that blouse that's really cute and you always thought you were going to wear, but you never wear it and it's just taking up space in your closet. And so we're going to let it go. Part of the thinning process. Then from there, we can start assigning a home. So this is where we decide, okay, the things that I've decided to keep, where am I going to put them away? How am I going to store them? What are the structures like bins, files, labels? What are those things that I need in order to support it? That is where the brethren come in. This is where policy comes into play, the third step, right? But we tend to want to take that to the beginning, right? We're at Target and we see this bin and it's like, oh my gosh, that is adorable. I want it. We buy it, we bring it home, and it's like, I don't know what I'm going to put in it, but it's really cute. Or we don't take the time to decide where we want to keep everything, what we're going to keep, what we're not going to keep. And we think, oh yeah, I have a rough idea. I want to keep this much stuff. So I'm going to get a bin that's this size and put it on my shelf here. So we go to the store and we're like, oh yeah, this looks like it'll work. We bring it home. We haven't done the sorting. We haven't done the thinning. And we haven't actually decided any of the process for assigning the home. So when it comes time to get to that fourth step, which is return, where we actually start putting the stuff away as we've decided it, we discover the bin we got doesn't fit on the shelf, and we ended up keeping more stuff than we thought we would, and so not everything even fits in the bin, right? That's the problem of when you try and take that step and move it to the front. And the problem is we do this a lot in the church because oftentimes from our perspective, that's what it appears to be happening, right? A policy change occurs or we get direction from the prophet that this is what we're going to be doing or focusing on. And we never hear the story that's gone on beforehand of the sorting and the thinning that has taken place. And the most beautiful thing that's happening right now that to me speaks more than anything to how we are moving towards this Zion people is how we are actively becoming more involved, the general membership in the sorting and the thinning process. And maybe this will be part 2 of the like theory U stuff I get into, but that I don't think our heavenly parents wanted us to come to earth and they were going to direct us in all things, right? They gave us agency. Clue number 1, right? So this idea that God is going to be directing everything is just flawed from the get-go, right? And so when we think everything in the church has to come directly from God through the channel, that's flawed. That's trying to get to that later step and move it to the front. God wants us to do the sorting, wants us to do the thinning. That's where our growth happens. And that's where we become ready and prepared for what takes place during the assign a home step, where we're actually starting to solidify things. So we sort, we thin, we assign a home. This is where we create the structures and the systems. We return. This is where we start enacting those things and actually doing them, practicing them. But the last step is to tune, which is we then regularly need to go back and check, how are we doing? How are things coming along? Do we need to sort this again? Do we need to thin some more things out? Have we outgrown the system and the structure? Is it time to update that? We saw this happen with President Nelson just very recently when he said, you know what, we've kind of outgrown the system and structure we have of church being the focus. We're going to make gospel study a family-centered thing and church-supported. These goals were still the same. We're still trying to proclaim the gospel and perfect the saints and care for the poor and the needy, right? But he just said, we're going to use a new system to start doing that. Now, from our perception, it may look like one night he was praying and God said to him, hey, you need to adjust this system and stop doing this. Maybe that's what happened. I bet, though, from my experience, from hearing just the experiences like even my dad has had of interacting in meetings with the apostles and things, and hey, we're discussing stuff that's going on and trying to make decisions, and knowing that even when it comes to who's going to be the next prophet, the process that goes through, there's deliberation, there's conversation, there's sorting, and there's thinning going on in that whole thing. I doubt that happens as often as we really think it does. And the beautiful thing is, I feel like more and more we are actually being encouraged to be a part of that process. To me, that's a big part of why we are encouraged to learn how to receive our own personal revelation more and more and more, because that's where we can start accessing our own power and find out what stewardships God is calling us to. You may be being called right now to speak up and sort through some of the stuff about how we address at church people who, oh my gosh, my mind just went completely blank. LBGT, right? That may be your calling. Your calling may be, I want to help parents of teens more. My calling may be, I want to help people be more financially independent, right? Figure out what that stewardship is, and you have access to that priesthood power right now through direct revelation and communication with your heavenly parents, right? And the more you do that, and you do that, and I do that, and everyone around us does that, that's establishing that hierarchical work of we all are in sync of understanding what our role is and how we can go about it. And I don't have to worry about, oh shoot, I'm not talking about that. I'm not helping people with that. And I'm not helping people with that, because I know you're taking care of that and you've got that. Oh, and they're really good at this, right? I don't have to become the master in all things, right? But we all get to be on kind of that equal spot. And the beautiful thing is, our goal is to move from a place where heavenly parents are in this hierarchical structure combined, where they're guiding us and directing. Okay, Emily, this is going to be your stewardship, and Becky, this is going to be your stewardship, and Susan, this is going to be your stewardship, right? They're guiding each of us in those. And that eventually one day we get to move and become partners with them and understand it more and more, to become as they are. that's the goal, that's the progression, that's the big picture of how all this works, right? And so when humanity was younger, we weren't ready for this, right? Personal revelation, that was a struggle. We were not there yet. And so hierarchy was placed just as it is with little kids as we're parenting them. No, don't touch the stove. No, don't run in the street, right? There's not a lot of like personal power going on for my 1.5-year-old. And he hates that sometimes, right? But he hasn't learned that and gained that ability to be able to move out of that hierarchical structure. It's there for his good and for his support. But as he grows, we start shifting where there gets to be more of this lateral power and we become more partners together. And it starts even with small things. What clothes do you want to wear? What food do you want to eat, right? Starting to gain that thing. And over time, I'm still up here, my kid's here, but over time, he becomes an adult and we get to be equals again, right? It's that same pattern we get to do with our heavenly parents, right? Anyway, so I hope that was as fun for you. I'm sorry it took me a minute to gather my thoughts and kind of get out of scattered mode from all the things I wanted to share with you, but I would love to hear your favorite thoughts. I'll be putting a post up on Instagram that you can comment, and we can take a minute here if you have any questions before we go. All right. Beautiful. If there's no questions, then I will just wish you all a wonderful night. And I hope you gained something out of this and enjoyed it as much as I did. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of the evening. Take care.